Good morning, everybody. My name is James Atkinson. I am the scientist and an engineer who specializes in hunting spies, snitches, and all forms of espionage. I specialize in looking out for the technical espionage and then finding the spy, or cybersecurity and then finding the spy. But ultimately, it's a technical process to find what is bugged and what is not bugged. It's a very fascinating business, and today I'm going to be going into the TSCM threat levels, or how eavesdropping activities are stratified, what they're targeted against, and the equipment that's used to find them. Now, this will be some generalities because I have other videos that go into each of these in much more granular detail and talk about specific makes and models of equipment. But here we go. Into the swamp I did wander, with a bucket and my hip waders on. Sun Tzu is accredited with saying, "Know your enemy and know yourself. In 100 battles, you will never be defeated. But when you are ignorant of the enemy, but know yourself, your chances of winning or losing are equal. If ignorant both of your enemy and of yourself, you are sure to be defeated in every battle." The threat posed by technical surveillance devices may be broken into 5 basic levels. There is some overlap between levels, and then of course there is what we call the emerging threat, which really is not an appropriate material for this presentation. That would be a presentation that talks about how the root technology changes, and as that root technology changes, how it gets introduced into various eavesdropping devices. But that's a multi-hour presentation all on its own. I'm not going to really cover it in this one, but look for the other ones. This is part 5 in an 18-part series, and then there's a 30-part series that follows this. It will give you a free 2-month-long TSCM education that you can't get anywhere else, and you can get it for free from here. Now, each level of threat increases the difficulty of detecting the device, and that increase is essentially an order of magnitude. So if we look at all kinds of devices, we look at what we need to use to find a threat, we then stratify that in orders of magnitude, and then we align a threat with that, and I'll go into that, how that's done in a few moments. Each level correlates to a specific eavesdropper or equipment usage. Each level also correlates to a specific type of TSCM inspection or TSCM sweep. Level 1 is consumer electronics. Level 2, spy shop toys. Level 3, law enforcement devices. Level 4 is professional eavesdropping equipment. Level 5 is what the intelligence agencies use. Now, level 1 is typically consumer electronic devices and hobbyist electronics. This used to be very commonly sold at Radio Shack. Now that Radio Shack doesn't exist anymore, then eBay, Walmart, music stores, places that sell guitars, Walmart, department stores, and other toy stores. These are things that are designed to do things like wireless microphones for singers, or baby monitors, or microphones for a camera or something like that. They were not originally designed for eavesdropping, but they can be readily used to do eavesdropping. Now, level 1 consumer devices, they're not designed to be used on surveillance bands. If they're a radio transmitter, they tend to operate in very specific consumer bands. If you get a company like Walmart, they're extremely fastidious to make sure that all of their stuff is on legal bands. When you go to an audio-video store where you buy professional microphones, they will sell you stuff that operates in this band, but they will also sell you stuff that operates in restricted bands, and operating wireless microphones on restricted bands can cause untold aggravation and very large fines and fees when the FCC catches up to you. Level 1 typically is generally involves frequencies below 1 gigahertz. However, there is a lot of 2.4 gigahertz that are used to transmit covert video. We call these Wavecom style. The reason we call it that is that Wavecom was the first company to roll out a super inexpensive $30 circuit, which everybody has copied and knocked off. So we do see a lot of 2.4 gigahertz video stuff, but it's fairly short distance, and all of this is very easy to detect. When consumer electronic devices are used to tap phones, it usually involves a small parasitic power draw. So because there's a parasitic power draw, it makes these extremely easy to detect by somebody in our profession. Now, the equipment and training required to find these devices generally does not require more than 4 hours of education. The problem is, nobody is going to go out doing bug sweeps to make money or as a living with just 4 hours of bug sweep training. Now, that kind of conflicts with what a lot of people do, because a lot of private investigators who don't know anything about doing bug sweeps, who've never done a bug sweep, have never learned to do a bug sweep, they run out, they buy a $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 box, and then they take 3 or 4 hours of training, and then they go out and they charge their customer $10,000 to use the box that 3 days ago they didn't even know how to put the batteries into it. So it's really a huge problem, and we'll talk about that in the presentations that I have elsewhere on training. Now, when this type of a service is rendered, it's usually by somebody who is just running a scam. They'll charge typically between $150 to $750. Sometimes they bill significantly more than that. There's been situations where somebody came in with 4 hours. They looked very mysterious. They got $75,000. They did not find the bugs that were there, but they did find the bugs that they brought with them. And then lawsuits were filed because the customer felt that money had been embezzled from them. And the user had to confess in court that he had only just bought the equipment and it arrived the night before. He read the manual, he looked at some videos, and all of his education was 2-3 hours long. And he ended up having to pawn the equipment because he couldn't get any additional work. So he had bought the equipment, harvested a great deal of money from a victim, gave the victim a scam, and I have another video that talks about TSCM scams to watch out for, because real bug sweeps costs a great deal of money, because that person has to have thousands of hours of bug sweep, formal classroom bug sweep time. They have to have forensics training if they can't lift a print or they can't collect DNA or sequence DNA. They're in the wrong line of business. So let's move along. Examples of the consumer electronics that are historically misused for eavesdropping are wireless microphones, intercom system and baby monitors, tape recorders, recorder starter relays, and what that does, it just starts a tape recorder recording when it detects the phone is off the hook. Inexpensive microphones, Radio Shack, Walmart type of things, video cameras, and camcorders. We don't see camcorders that much anymore, but back in the 90s and the early 2000s, camcorders was where it was at. And then back in the early 80s, it was a really big thing. Nowadays, video cameras with SD cards are used far more commonly than camcorders. Inexpensive microphones. Inexpensive is all relative. You can get a fairly inexpensive microphone for less than $40, or you can get something extremely fancy for $400. It's the same type of gear. It's the same level of threat. It is still consumer electronics gear. With consumer electronics gear, the technical profile they're typically RF devices, radio frequency devices. They transmit over the airwaves in some way. Now, the eavesdropper likes to use these because it allows him to plant the bug, allows he or she to plant the bug, and then to sit a safe distance away and listen into or record what they've intercepted. These frequencies are typically between 9 kilohertz and 3 gigahertz. If you want to be more specific, between 75 kilohertz and 2.7 gigahertz, with most stuff stopping at 2.5 gigahertz. The power levels are typically below or way below 50 milliwatts, which means the distance is very short. With some minor modifications, most of this equipment can be increased to fire for several miles wide. It very commonly is narrowband, often spread spectrum, and it's in the ISM bands. When it's wideband, it's usually spread spectrum, burst, or frequency hopping, but it's extremely rare to find that. The narrowband spread spectrum is far more widespread use. Now, the technical profile of consumer electronics, if it's an infrared device, it's usually clustered around 900 nanometers, which is a frequency of light or infrared frequency. They may use AM, narrow FM, or wide FM modulation. There's very little or no use of encryption. They have very high harmonic components due to poor filters. They interfere with other communications as well. The circuitry is usually very inefficient because it's very cheaply made and cheaply bought and cheaply aligned. And there's very little quality control on it other than plug the battery and the light comes on, it's good, sell it. Now, the countermeasures for level 1 devices is relatively simple. You need a digital multimeter. You'll also need a resistor matrix, and that is used to help you use the digital multimeter and help you find things which are loading the phone line in some way. Handheld or pocket RF field detectors are handy. They're very kludgy. They only cost about $99 each, but they are only of value if you know how to use them, and you can get exceedingly close to the bug. There's near-field detectors, which are basically they're handheld RF detectors that have been modified to respond to the magnetic field as opposed to the electrical field. There are what are called diode detectors or feedback detectors or howlers, which means they howl like the feedback in an audio system because that's what they're doing. They work very well. They can detect things from a more significant distance, but all told, if you have $300, you can typically buy a near-field detector, a feedback detector, and then some sort of RF field detector. The digital multimeter, that's going to cost about $500 to $1,200 for that because you want the absolutely best quality, the best quality one that you can find. You can't find very many good ones for only $300. Now, with level 1 consumer electronics, when somebody is trained in this, training is typically under 3 or 4 hours. However, there are schools which teach 1 to 2 days of training, and they teach you everything that they think you need to know, and all that they're doing is they're teaching you how to use the product that they make and sell to you. So they're not going to teach you how to do anything other than operate their equipment, and they set up training situations that reveal their products in an undue positive light. So you're only going to learn in a 1 or 2 day course a couple pieces of equipment from that company. They're going to do the demonstration and the training under very controlled circumstances. Their goal is to sell you equipment and teach you enough just to be dangerous. So when you deal with somebody who's only had a few hours of TSCM training, or who they don't have the equipment right now, but they're going to go buy it, Mondays, very commonly, someone will meet with a security consultant on a Monday. On Tuesday, they'll tell them that they'd like to engage them to do the sweep. They want the sweep done on Friday and Saturday, and then all day Wednesday, this guy, the person who's going to do the sweep, runs around trying to borrow, beg, rent, or acquire equipment which he has no technical training in whatsoever. But on Friday, he's going to go out and make $10,000 doing a bug sweep, but he doesn't know what he's doing. But consumer electronics is actually relatively easy to find. Now, with level 1 consumer electronic bug sweeps, so these are if you are looking for consumer electronic devices, there's about 50,000 people worldwide who do bug sweeps at this level. About 4,500 private firms in the United States offer bug sweeps at this level. Unfortunately, about 4,490 of them have no clue what they're doing, but okay. 50% of the companies offering services of this nature, be it the people or the private firms, are private investigators who really don't have any business doing bug sweeps. They can bring a bug sweep guy in, but the PI's job is not looking for bugs. Approximately about 25% are security consulting firms who also don't know how to do bug sweeps, so they run out and they hire people for just 1 or 2 bug sweeps at a time. And it's not very profitable for security consulting firms to do bug sweeps because of the huge equipment requirement needs. Now, the remaining fourth are con artists, spy shops, and crooks. These are all the same providers: con artists, spy shops, and crooks. They'll say and do anything to separate you from your cache. They want to come out and do the bug sweep for you, but they want to do it right now, and they don't want you to leave your office, or they won't leave your office until you give them a check to come out right away within a matter of hours and do a bug sweep. That's a sign of a hustle and a scam. If they won't let you think about it for a few days, you shouldn't do business with them. But it doesn't matter if they're trying to hustle you to buy a used car right here, right now, so you can leave a lot with it, or a bug sweep. Watch for the warning signs of a scam. I've got some videos that will help you out. Take a look at other parts of my channel, and you'll find some very illuminating ways to protect yourself against these sorts of scams. Now, let's look at level 2. These are devices sold or specifically modified for use in covert surveillance. These are, for example, a clock radio that has had a video camera and a microwave video transmitter installed into it, and it's a piece of consumer electronics specifically modified for use in covert surveillance. It's usually low cost video transmitters. Everybody wants video these days, and consumer band wireless microphones. Typically, these are level 1 devices which have been retuned, modified, and placed into a concealment. It could be lamps, clocks, eyeglass cases, microwave ovens, air fresheners, anything that you would normally find in a bedroom or a kitchen or a living room has historically had covert video cameras and covert microphones installed in them. Now, the primary indicator of a level 2 device is it is a smaller in size, and it has sometimes an ingenious concealment, sometimes just a relatively stupid concealment, but these are all fairly easy to find. The equipment will usually operate on well-known spy shop bands and ham radio bands. Often they use consumer band frequencies, but when they do that and they're operating in consumer bands, the probability of them getting caught by accident is very high. So they will move them to ham radio bands. The problem is, if you interfere with the ham radio bands, ham radio people are going to complain. So they put them on spy shop frequencies, which these frequencies are very well known and can be very easily caught from a considerable distance. Level 2 spy shop toys also includes equipment used for tapping phone lines, where parasitic power draw is done. So if the little bug has a 9-volt battery in it, and that provides power to the circuit, you have to replace the battery relatively frequently. But if there's a parasitic power draw, it is powered off the line. but there's a very simple way to detect these, even at considerable distances. The isolation circuits, if any, will be very crude. Very commonly what we see is a couple of diodes and one capacitor is the isolation circuit, which makes it very easy to detect. The equipment is minimal to do this sort of a bug sweep. The cost is moderate. It can be typically, if spy shop devices are being utilized and you need to address those, plan for a much higher level of sophistication, because if a spy shop device is being used, there's probably 3 more that are also there, and one of those may be fairly sophisticated, and it is not uncommon for a spy shop to supply somebody with 5 or 6 bugs, 4 that can be easily found, and then 2 requires days of searching. Now, firms offering bug sweep services at this level are typically charging between $500 and $1,500 for a limited sweep. It's not uncommon for it to take only 4 to 6 hours from start to finish, and 2 hours or less is actually fairly commonplace. The sweep itself takes maybe 15 minutes, and then the person doing the sweep stands around and talks for 2 hours and 45 minutes. So they're actually there only 3 or 4 hours, but 30 minutes of that's work, sometimes 15 minutes. Now what we're looking at is we're looking for telephone bugs, body wires, wireless microphones, intercom systems, baby monitors, and tape recorders. We're also looking for recorder starter relays, which is just a way to activate a tape recorder when the phone is taken off the hook. Very inexpensive microphones or wireless microphones, video cameras, camcorders. Like I've said before, camcorders aren't used that much anymore. And then related electronic devices, which are really nothing more than consumer toys and gadgets. Typically, when we're looking at these, we're looking for radio frequencies between 9 kilohertz or less and up to 6 gigahertz, because we have to consider the 5.8 gigahertz range. And generally, it's good to check up to 13.5 gigabits with this. The very popular range for these is between 78 and 120 megahertz, which is around the FM radio band and aero band. Then the VHF band between 135 and 174 megahertz. And then, of course, the UHF band between 380 and 490 megahertz. What we're finding in the field is generally between 25 milliwatts, sometimes less, and 500 milliwatts, which is half a watt. But the half watt stuff is not that common. More often than not, what we're seeing is 20 milliwatt, 25 milliwatt, 35 milliwatt. There is a FCC standard that kind of wrangles everything below 50 milliwatts, but sometimes you will see stuff that's been cranked up to 500 milliwatts. The technical profile may also be narrow band spread spectrum. Typically ISM bands are being used. We have the 900 megahertz band, the 2.4 gigahertz band, and a 5.8 gigahertz band. However, Wi-Fi collides heavily with the 2.4 and the 5.8 gig bands, and those are less desirable to use. Now, this can also include infrared devices clustered around 900 megahertz, 3-4 different types of modulation, AM, FM, and YFM is very common. FM modulated video with an FM audio subcarrier is fairly commonplace. In order to get a good video, they do FM modulation, and then they have a subcarrier for the left and right audio channel. And there's very rarely do these ever use any kind of encryption or any kind of scrambling. So it makes them relatively easy and straightforward to catch. The technical profile is also there's detectable, often very sloppy harmonic components which interfere with other equipment, which again makes it very easy to find. These are designed for toys used by amateurs. These spy shop toys are typically repackaged in some sort of concealment, and they're usually fairly low cost. In fact, they're so fairly low cost that it's breathtaking how much they sell for because they're so low cost to manufacture and modify. Equipment used to find these are digital multimeters, handheld or pocket RF field detectors like optoelectronics. Those devices are quite nice to find these. Near field detectors, but you need to start using some very specialized antennas. The antennas are not overly sophisticated. The feedback detectors are a very quick and dirty and very time-honored method of finding these. And then an ultrasonic stethoscope, because there are some things that you can pick up with an ultrasonic stethoscope that will help you find bugs that are really crazy, scary, hidden. Now, we can also use a number of commercially available countermeasures. The Avcom PSA 65 has historically been an extremely inexpensive spectrum analyzer. It's a good spectrum analyzer. The Beckman analyzer is pretty good. There's a number of very inexpensive spectrum analyzers that you can buy on eBay. Also, software-defined radios will help, but software-defined radios are only designed to pick up one type of signal activity. You can also get briefcase receiver systems like the Rockwell MSS, the Ranger, the Scanlock, the Eagle. You don't really need those things. It's better just to get a really good spectrum analyzer and a couple of sweep receivers and just attack it through that. It requires less than $20,000 in equipment to detect. So if you were to go out and buy an Avcom, an MSS, a Scanlock, you might be spending $20,000, but you're also starting to transition into stuff that's used to find level 3 devices, not just level 1 and 2. Now, the credentials to do this type of a bug sweep usually involves 10 days of TSCM training total. That's 2 weeks in total, usually less. Sadly, usually much less. Some schools do TSCM in 2-week increments. Some teach half the class before lunch, and then the other half the class after lunch, and that's all you get for a $20,000 briefcase. And there's about 10,000 people worldwide who can do this level of bug sweep. The credentials that we're typically looking at, if there's 2,500 private security firms in the United States, 75% will be private investigators, 15% will be security consultants, and then 10% will be everybody else. But every major city has at least 50 firms who do bug sweeps at this level. So if you have a serious problem, you're going to have to bring somebody in from one of the 9 major cities. If you're in Manhattan, you may actually have to find people outside of Manhattan because there's so much charlatanism inside Manhattan that you're going to have to bring somebody in from Connecticut or Albany, New York, or Boston or something like that to address the problem that you're experiencing. Now, the typical suppliers of the level 2 spy shops, of course, Radio Shack, which no longer exists, PK Electronics, Microelectronics, Lorraine, Zandy, Deco, Ramsey, and Super Circuits. If you're familiar with some of my other videos, you know that Zandy, Super Circuits, and PK got into a bit of hot water. Now, level 3 takes us up to professional devices. This is not the type of thing you would ever buy at Walmart. You might be able to buy it on eBay, but usually not. These are devices used by, for example, the professional audio engineers industry or a TV station to transmit audio from a newscaster's lapel microphones to the cameramen's camcorder. These are usually things used in industrial, scientific, broadcast, and in the law enforcement community. Now, that does not include bugs used by the law enforcement community, but rather various technological things like body-worn cameras by the police and things like that. The equipment is generally not available to the public, or the public has to jump through a lot of hoops to buy it. It's usually extraordinarily expensive for spy shops or amateur spies. The spy shop wants to increase everything they touch by 40 times or more. Amateur spies, they just can't afford it. The spy shops, if they buy it for $1,000, they have to sell it for $40,000. So then they have to add $35,000 worth of bovine fecal matter to the sales pitch to get the executive to buy into their $40,000 bug. That's just a wireless microphone that they bought that cost them $400. Now, about 60% of these products are used by the broadcast industry. They're video transmitters, body wires, wireless audio products that either transmit to the performer or pick up a handheld microphone or stand-mounted microphone that picks up the song or the speaking. But these are things designed for broadcast and recording industry. They're commonly relabeled and sold to law enforcement agencies at just absolutely stupid, inflated prices. I've seen many cases where something sold by Shure microphone or Electro Voice or Sennheiser or one of the other broadcast or commercial audio companies, they made a wireless transmitter. That wireless transmitter cost $350. The receiver was another $350. So the entire system was $700. I've seen law enforcement agencies pay $700,000 for that exact same product. All the seller did was scrape off the labels, put their own labels in it, and copy the instruction manual, and they sold that. And then 6 months later, they sold another one, and ultimately there was a $7 million in purchases done. And the officers who were buying these overpriced pieces of consumer gear, they were actually getting cash money under the table to spend the money with this one particular supplier. It's very bad news. And I have a video that talks about deconstructing bug sweep cases and deconstructing the equipment and deconstructing and looking forensically at all of the documents and the materials. Because when somebody uses a bug on a channel that they're not supposed to, or something is not allocated to them, or they've used dodgy methods and techniques to get the equipment they're using, there is a requirement under the law that all the evidence that they collected be excluded. So if they're using bugging equipment that's not on certain frequencies, so for example, a good example is an inexpensive bug that operates at 121.5 megahertz or at say 243 megahertz. As soon as they fire it up, that's going to leave a significant technological trail of who got it, who bought it, who used it, and so on. And that agency has just violated federal law because those frequencies they used are prohibited, or they use something that's on a broadcast TV frequency. And that if you get the purchasing documents for the device and you can prove that that device is not on a legal frequency or that's illegal power line use, you can get the whole case thrown out. So I do deconstructions of eavesdropping cases for attorneys where I'm given copies of the case records. I go through, I do a technical analysis, I come to court, I give the court my expert opinion, and what happens is in some cases the police officers go to jail. But the innocent walk free because the police are breaking the law. So about 40% of the equipment in level 3 is purpose-built for law enforcement. And these are things which companies which make, like HDS, they make bugs for law enforcement. They also make video equipment for the broadcast community, as does E-Systems and a number of other companies. But what they're making is a is a copy of a broadcast product in a concealment device. So, for example, HDS for quite some time made these very elaborate video camera systems and audio repeater systems, and they built them into fake transformers. So you'd go out of your house and you would see there's an old telephone pole, but now there's an extra transformer on it. And if you look very carefully, you would see that there's a window, a glass window, and if you very carefully examined it, or you brought somebody in to examine it, you would find out that there's a remote control video camera and repeater system inside that transformer. No search warrant, no court order, no legal authority for them to even buy the equipment, let alone use it. And by deconstructing the case, the charges get thrown out, and police officers they end up facing charges for breaking federal law. Now, with level 3 equipment, it's quasi-legal for the government, for the public to possess it, buy it, sell it, or attempt to buy it. But it's a gray area. So if you go into a professional audio store, you can throw down $1,000 and get a really good quality digital modulated wireless microphone in the 600 megahertz range. But you're not supposed to use it unless you're a TV station. If it's used for eavesdropping, so even though it's in a gray area and you can buy it retail, it's illegal to use it in an unlawful manner. So if you use it to do eavesdropping, you've broke federal law. Now, these devices typically operate on specific broadcast support or law enforcement frequencies. It's very rare for them to use consumer band frequencies because they will be detected way too easily. When these are used at a level 3, the eavesdropper assumes that the target is soft, and he assumes that the target is not expecting eavesdropping. They assume that if anything, the target will be using spy shop bug detectors, and it creates a false sense of security when the eavesdropper does this, because the victim may be bringing a company like us in, and the spy will never see us coming, never hear us coming. He won't even know that we've been on the property until he goes to leave his listening post, and people jump on him and clamp him in handcuffs and haul him away. The equipment for tapping phone lines will normally contain an isolation circuit. It's very difficult to detect the circuit electronically. However, with a good digital voltmeter, you can detect it 100% of the time, but it's a little pricey to get a good unit. The device is best found through a careful physical inspection, because if the batteries are dead, it's not going to be transmitting audio anymore, and you can't find dead bugs without using your naked eyes and ears and fingers and other senses. The 3 indicators of a level 3 device is it's initially designed, marketed, and sold to a non-public customer, such as a TV studio, a research lab, an industrial lab, a law enforcement agency, or a medical research facility of some sort. The equipment used to perform the TSCM survey, it starts becoming intense and expansive as we transition from mid, like at 3.5, and start moving towards 4. TSCM services in this area cost between $3,500 and $30,000 for a single one-day sweep. However, legitimate TSCM inspections to find this sort of device typically requires 27 man days. That's a 9-person team, 3 days on site. And that's level 3.5 to 4. 3 typically includes body bumpers, tracking devices, tracking beacons, tape recorders, covert night cameras, night vision products, related equipment. The frequencies that they use is typically between 3 kilohertz. Technically, that should be about 75 kilohertz, because there's a lot of 75 kilohertz of gear out there, up to 60 gig. The power levels are typically between 25 milliwatt, very often 3 to 5 milliwatts, and sometimes 3 watts or more. Spread spectrum ISM bands are very commonly used, as are burst, frequency hopping, and direct sequence spread spectrum. Now, with level 3, the infrared range tends to be a little bit wider. I routinely see things at 800, 850, 950, 1100 is very commonplace, but I've also seen some infrared eavesdropping devices that operated in the 1550 nanometer and 1750 and 1950 nanometer bands. The modulation type can be 90 to 95 different modulation types. There's usually some limited use of encryption, but they're very simple algorithms for encryption. They're extremely easy to break, and limited use of digital modulation, although QAM is a digital modulation technique. It's expensive, but very high performance. It's designed only for short-term, low-risk technical surveillance. The countermeasures are digital multimeters, handheld pocket RF detectors, near-field detectors, feedback detectors or howlers, ultrasonic stethoscopes, nonlinear junction detectors, spectrum analyzers, spectral correlators such as the Eagle, Scanlock, Ranger, some of the similar products, and then the automated spectrum monitoring systems. And these are the more awesome ones that are out there. The Rockwell MSS is one of my favorite. The Condor ACES system I really like a great deal. The SWRI OmniScan I like. The HP and the ITAC systems, I like those as well. The Watkins-Johnson at this level, well, the Watkins-Johnson is really stuff that's level 4, level 5, but the Rockwell MSS does a nice job. We also use, in this frequency range, spectrum analyzers. Those are a must-have for these. Vector signal analyzers, and these are mainly used when you're using some sort of digital modulation or some sort of spread spectrum. Of course, very high bandwidth oscilloscopes, nonlinear junction detectors. Typically, those are interfaced with a standalone spectrum analyzer system, and then intercept and search receivers, stuff like Watkins-Johnson, the Microtel, things like that. Now, we also utilize telephone analyzers, time-domain reflectometers, portable X-ray equipment, or semi-mobile CAT scan systems. We start, when you get into 3.5 and above, we can very easily have a small amount of equipment that involves $500,000 of portable equipment, but things start picking up a significant amount dollar-wise to detect this stuff reliably. To learn to do this, you're going to need to spend 30 to 40 days of TSCM training to just learn the basics. There are approximately 200 people worldwide formally certified at this level. That includes both government people certified as well as private industry, investigators, venture capitalist firms who do due diligence, a wide variety of companies which do this. In the United States, there's roughly 150 private firms to do this who employ about 1,500 people. Now, to successfully find level 3 devices, typically the Department of Energy TSRC course, well is better than nothing, does assist in level 3 and some level 4 stuff. Somebody who's an FBI trained TSCM specialist, which I'll try not to choke as I say that, they can usually find level 2, level 3. They have a really tough time successfully finding stuff at level 4. Typical defense contractor sweep team, and I use the word sweep team in air quotes, they'll go out, they recruit somebody who 40 years ago was doing bug sweeps for the CIA or the NSA, and who has since been unemployed and who has not done a bug sweep in 30 years, the defense contractor will buy a set of bug sweep gear, and they'll get these people who don't have any technical background. They just like went to interagency training facility and then did stuff for the Army, but they haven't done such since. They don't own their own equipment. They never kept up with other engineering background or engineering courses. But those defense contractors employ a small army of people on sweep teams who really shouldn't be doing anything on sweep teams. It's really bad, and they're notoriously ineffective. And there's been some notoriously horrible cases in the United States where people who had absolutely no clue what they were doing bug sweeps for the federal government, and there was all types of embezzlement, misrepresentation of credentials, and some people actually died because of it. Typical suppliers, we've mentioned some of these earlier. You're going to see Lorraine, PK Electronics, Microelectronics, AudioTel, who makes pretty good stuff, Household Data Systems, or HDS, Sony, Telex, Audio Intelligence Devices. With Level 4, this involves primarily professional eavesdropping gear. It is typically equipment designed, marketed, and sold as a covert eavesdropping product. It is designed not to be detected during a typical low-level bug sweep. Now, it will be found when a professional bug sweep scientist or engineer is doing a bug sweep, and it will be found virtually 100% of the time. But these are professional eavesdropping gear which has considerable effort put into it to design it so that it does not drift. It is not physically large. It utilizes only as much power for transmission as absolutely necessary. The device for a professional will require a great deal of time to locate and to identify. So it may be one device that takes 24 man-hours to find one device, or that might take 72 man-hours to find one device, because the professional TSCM person is using a very carefully crafted protocol that they use to go through so that they don't miss any details. They document, and it requires a great deal of time to do this. But this is how we find professional eavesdropping equipment at level 4 and then also at level 5. It has to be regarded at level 4 that TSCM activities of some sort will be performed at the target location. So the spy knows that you're going to be looking for his bugs. It's usually monitored, and historically, it's monitored by a full-time staff at a fixed remote command post. They will also have the target under intense physical surveillance, and the listening post or fixed command post will be monitoring guard bands for things like spectrum analyzers being used, or search receivers being used, or nonlinear junction detectors, even X-ray or other systems being used. When I say physical surveillance, well, let's say that somebody has bugged the office of an executive's home, where they've put wireless microphones and video cameras inside their office at home, or the VC firm which they own. They've put video cameras and fixed frame cameras and microphones everywhere. So having it under intense physical surveillance means that somebody is sitting nearby and they are watching the outside of the building as well as watching the inside of the building, because they have to undertake activities to pull out the bugging device, because if they see somebody rolling in with a whole bunch of bug sweep gear, or they have somebody rolling in who they recognize as being a bug sweep expert, they'll need to turn off their equipment and start coming up with a way to hide the command post. So they will have a plan to have intense physical surveillance on an area where they have targeted that area with cameras and microphones and so forth. And they typically do this from a fixed command post, which can be a few 100 feet away. It can be 1.5 miles away. Now, level 4 professional eavesdropping equipment is commonly used when businessmen bug each other, but only when big dollars are involved. So if somebody is interested in shorting a biotech stock, they'll have eavesdroppers come in and perform eavesdropping onto that biotech company's Ethernet network on their file servers, and they will undertake a sophisticated eavesdropping and espionage activity so they can get the insider information that they can use that information to fuel their trades using insider information. It's actually very commonly done in the finance community. Illegally done, but it's still very commonly done. Now, to do this type of a bug sweep at level 4, the equipment is considerable. The background is considerable. The cost to do it is considerable, and even a very basic bare bones inspection will easily run $40,000 to $75,000 just for a very limited project of this nature. A comprehensive version of this takes many weeks and costs many times more than this. In fact, a longer sweep that takes less than 1 month may easily cost $300,000 or more. And it's not much you can do in 3 or 4 days. So these sweeps are normally 4 to 6 days long. And then before the sweep is done, then there is the rings, the radials, and the pins that are done, which adds typically 2 weeks to the front end of it. And then there'll be the processing of all the data and the maps and so forth, which can easily take 2 more weeks after that, plus the writing of the formal report. For level 4 eavesdropping gear, we're talking at wireless microphones, all professional stuff, digital VLF devices that transmit the audio or even video or encrypted things from encryption equipment over the power lines, over the telephone lines, even out of a skiff, because there's a wide variety of product that allows classified information to be transmitted through the filters of a skiff. So these can be telephone line filters or power filters. It's no problem at all getting signals through these filters. It's also very commonly also involves a LAN/WAN eavesdropping device, either to sit there and passively listen to what's going across the network, or to set up a two-way communications port so you have remote access to inject packets into and then pull packets back out of. These the two-way LAN/WAN systems are extremely lethal to large corporations, especially large corporations involved in biology, biotech, medicine, engineering, aviation. It's a LAN/WAN two-way bug allows information to be planted into the network, it allows information to be deleted from the network, and it allows data to be stolen from the network. This can also include bugged copy machines, bugged fax machines, bugged computers, bugged monitors, bugged keyboards, bugged USB cables, bugged hard drives. It can be modified telephones, PBXs, or voicemail systems. It can involve cellular intercept systems, which generally these are not detectable. If it's one of these briefcase type of intercept systems, which were the older systems, those could be detected fairly easily, as could the beeper pager systems. However, they're dealing with the intercept at distances that are far enough away from the target that you're not going to pick up much when these are being used. You're typically looking for the IF and mixer images or bleeds from very specific pieces of equipment. So, for example, a cellular intercept system made by, say, Agilent, if you understand the circuitry inside the modules that they make for the FBI, then you can target those modules. And anytime you see those modules being used electronically, you see their signatures, you know that the FBI is eavesdropping, and then you can direction find to the exact location where their listening post is and show up with some surprises. Level 4, professional eavesdropping gear, also has a bit wider frequency range. There are eavesdropping devices that transmit down at 3 kilohertz, and when we're doing bug sweeps, we have to get way up to 135 gigahertz, although my preference is to get up to 325 and then 1.2 and 1.5 terahertz, but not at level 4. Level 4, 135 is usually appropriate. The power levels are typically between 250 nanowatts or even picowatts, and potentially as high as 100 milliwatts, but the extremely low power is more commonplace than the higher power 100 milliwatt. It can be wide or narrow band, spread spectrum, burst frequency hopping. There's over 156 types of modulation that are used, and there's heavy usage of digital and hybrid modulation. When we're dealing with infrared devices, where it takes such as room audio and modulates it on an infrared beam, and then somebody intercepts that beam outside the room, that's typically between 300 nanometers and 1910 nanometers, and are extremely easy to detect. They may actually use burst transmission, where there's a memory circuit. It saves up all the audio all day, and then once there's no activity in the business, then it will make a real fast burst transmission of all of the data, the video, the compressed video, and just jam it into just a few seconds of transmission. Or it may only transmit every couple of days at 3 o'clock in the morning. It commonly uses some sort of duplex link for remote control and supervision of the device, also to sound an alarm if somebody starts tampering with the device or finds the device, or something happens, so that the eavesdroppers can come in, create a distraction, and then remove or neutralize the device that they were using for eavesdropping. The technical profile, there's usually heavy use of encryption using complex algorithms or complex scrambling methods. Like I said, there's going to be heavy use of digital modulation. It's very expensive. It's very high performance. It's designed for long-term, high-risk technical surveillance, and it's very laborious to find, because you're never looking for just one, because eavesdroppers at this level never just put one in. In this case, we also would use spectrum analyzers that would go on the higher stuff, would be 10 hertz to 325 gigahertz vector spectrum analyzers with very high bandwidths, not typical bandwidths. A nonlinear junction detector system, but it's not your mother's nonlinear junction detectors. This is one of the newer types where it's a spectrum analyzer and an amplifier. So instead of looking at little lights blipping and bleeping, you're actually looking at waveforms on a spectrum analyzer display. Purpose-built search intercept receivers such as the Microtel, the Watkins Johnson, a number of other companies. Measuring receivers, which are extraordinarily sensitive receivers but they require tremendous amounts of background as to how to operate them, specialized antennas, specialized amplifiers, hundreds and hundreds of pounds of filters, and then, of course, telephone analyzers. We also will be using time-domain reflectometers, portable X-ray equipment, or CT scanners. My preference is the CT scanner, although you have to have a vehicle dedicated just to it. There's LAN-WAN analysis instruments, and typically, to do a level 4, you're going to be talking about typically $1 million of TSCM equipment. The training to do this is going to run not less than 120 days of highly specialized TSCM training. That's in addition to a technical background. There's only 250 people or so worldwide who are formally certified at this level, and there's 5, maybe 6 private firms in the United States which offer TSCM at this level of service. The interagency training facility, it's, for example, at the Fort Washington, which is actually a CIA training facility hidden on a Navy base. They can typically train level 4, but they have a real difficult time training level 5. And the ITC has been quite a national embarrassment with their people having virtually no success in finding bugs that remained there for years before they were found by accident. But that's better than nothing. Now, level 5 is the most dangerous types of bugging devices. These are the ones used by intelligence agencies. They are purpose-built for the intelligence agencies by major contractors. They use ultra-low power, spread spectrum, and digital devices. They are used by nations to spy on each other. Sometimes nations like, some small nation like Yemen or Dubai or Oman, they might use something very primitive that's only a level 3. But the U.S. government, when they spy on the Canadian government, when they spy on the British government, and then Canada when they spy on Australia, they're using very sophisticated devices, very sophisticated methods, and very sophisticated concealments. Each and every installation involves hundreds of thousands and often tens of millions of dollars. It requires considerable assets to be in place prior to the installation. Assets as in eavesdroppers and vans and places for the eavesdroppers to live. So the last thing that goes in is the bug. The first thing that goes in is all the resources to support the bug. The equipment is, for this sort of project, is extremely involved. The training, after you get a technical background, then you have to add 5,000 hours on top of that before you'll even be allowed to go out in the field and work with any of these type of situations. So if you go to school, you get 4 years of college, and you go in the military, you do that for 5 or 6 years, and then you get out. At that point, you might be able to get recruited by a government entity or a private entity who will give you 4,000 to 5,000 hours of training before they take you out to do your first bug sweep, and you'll go out as a junior member of a team. Now, firms which do these sorts of level 5 projects typically charge between $75,000 to $750,000 for a limited sweep. It requires a lot of people. It requires a great deal of time. It requires a great deal of preparatory work that, well, it's done in the local area, such as rings and radials. There's also a great deal of time that has to be spent after the project is over. Now, level 5, being used by intelligence agencies, is usually a highly sophisticated wireless microphone system, digital, very high quality VLF systems with lots of buffering, and mechanisms to bypass signals through the filters in SCIFs specialized covert video camera systems, LAN WAN eavesdropping and penetration devices, of course, bugged copy machines, bugged fax machines, bugged computers, bugged monitors, modified PBX systems, voicemail systems, telephone systems, cellular intercept systems, pager, beeper intercept systems, and all other forms of technical harvesting of the private data of other people. Next we have the technical profile. The signals, the frequencies used are typically between DC and 1.5 terahertz. For the most part, to be technical about it, we're looking at signals between 10 hertz and 1.5 terahertz, because if we're not really looking at DC, what we're looking at is things that are almost DC. The signal levels are historically kept as low as possible. It's not uncommon to see stuff that's under 10 to 25 nanowatts or even a picowatt level. Then they'll slope up to the 250 nanowatt levels, but 10 milliwatts is somewhat, or 100 milliwatts is somewhat rare. Below 50 milliwatts is more common, but extremely low power levels are very, very common and is very desirable. There's extensive use of conducted signal paths, all conducted signal paths. There's heavy use of fiber optics, usually. There's burst, there's frequency hopping, there's narrow and wideband direct spectrum, or direct sequence. There's all kinds of exotic modulation methods used. The optical devices are a little bit different here. These may involve optical devices that you can actually see the light from. So a slight flicker on a fluorescent bulb may actually be data being transmitted through that fluorescent bulb and out of the building. So we very commonly see optical light being modulated at 300 nanometers, and we may very well see it in the 1500, 1700, or even 3500 nanometer bands. There are devices that are fiber optic eavesdropping systems that run the light at 3500 nanometers. So you have to have the equipment that you can see optical spectrum analysis, and you have to go do it through free space and also through all optically conductive surfaces such as glass, fibers, and so on. I do have a presentation about how this is done, what it looks like, the pitfalls of doing free space color analysis, but that's for a different video. There are hundreds. As we start getting into some of these, there are hundreds and hundreds of modulation methods, and these systems use complex hybrid modulation systems. It's very popular to use burst transmissions, which gives you low probability of intercept and low probability of detection. There usually is some sort of duplex link, so you can fully remote control the device, get remote alarms, and take the health of the unit. There's heavy use of encryption using very complex modulations, and like I said, very heavy use of digital modulation. So it's of course very difficult to find. It's designed for long-term high-risk technical surveillance. It typically involves also planting decoy devices. It is very expensive. It is very high-performance equipment. There is a high probability of a repeater or satellite being used, or even a cell phone system being used. It's not uncommon to see a full-scale bugging of an entire switching system or PBX in a government building. It's very manpower intensive, involving scores of eavesdroppers on every shift. It's never a small undertaking. So you're not just looking for a little bug here and there. You're looking for 24 spies that are sitting back listening in on these. Now the countermeasures are spectrum analyzers, high bandwidth vector signal analyzers, nonlinear junction detectors, search intercept receivers, measuring receivers with all of their specialized filters and antennas, telephone Now, with Level 5 intelligence agency systems, some of our countermeasures, this is not all of our countermeasures, this is some of them, are time domain reflectometers, thermal imaging equipment, portable X-ray systems or CAT scan systems, LAN-WAN analysis instruments, which can be quite complex. But it does require over $3 million minimum of equipment to be brought to the location to do the analysis. It's often 14,000 pounds of gear or more, and very often it's over 25,000 pounds of gear. That's 12 tons, 12 to 13 tons of equipment. And that is just enough equipment to support 2 10-man teams. So if you have 2 10-man teams, then you also have to have a support team who just takes care of all the logistics. So you may have 20 people in the building, 10 at a time, but there may actually be 30, 35, 40 people involved in administration of the entire project, which gets very pricey very quickly. There is also the issue of the credentials to do this. There are only, in the United States, 3 private firms credentialed to provide TSCM services at this level. In the entire world, there's only 50 firms that provide this sort of a service, and it requires years of highly specialized TSCM training on top of generic technical training. So, for example, somebody will go to school, they'll get a bachelor's degree in electronics engineering, and then they'll get their master's degree in electronics engineering. Then they'll go in the military, do 6 years in the military. Then when they're finished with that, then they will either go back into private sector, or they'll shift over to, say, the Central Intelligence Agency, where they will go through several years of TSCM training, and then they'll be put out in the field doing TSCM as a junior member of a larger, much more experienced team. There are presently no schools in the United States with the U.S. federal government that can provide this change. It's been a many decades long embarrassment. There's always, each year, there's a promise of, well, it's going to change soon, but it will change when pigs fly. And you should study the Stilwell Commission, because they identified a cancer within the intelligence community where the officials and officers within the intelligence communities were fleecing the U.S. government hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars a year for sending their people to schools, but they weren't really doing it. So you had hundreds of people doing bug sweeps for the U.S. government who weren't really doing sweeps for the government, and they developed quite the imposter syndrome, where they thought they were doing really good, and they were told they were doing really good, but the intelligence services of other countries were essentially laughing at them. It's really unfortunate, but our national security is actually extremely weak when compared to that of other countries. Let's look at some of those. If you wish to go work for the British government, you can get TSCM training which is superior to that taught in the United States. The same thing with Australia, the same thing with Japan, the same thing with Switzerland. The Red Banner Institute does an astoundingly good program of teaching, but to do the proper TSCM at the Red Banner, you're going to have to earn a master's degree in electronics engineering first, serve in the military, serve in military intelligence, and then RBI will let you go through their 5-year intensive. So their 5-year intensive is 15,000 hours of training. It's an excellent program, The problem is the people in the program, once they get deployed, tend not to live very long because they're given one chance to make a mistake. One. That's it. And then the person who made the mistake is executed, and everybody learns a lesson. The CSE in Canada has a pretty good program. The Israelis have a fascinating program. They can do more with 5 people than the U.S. government can do with 100. They're much more compact. They're much more dedicated to keeping everything small. And when they go out and do a bug sweep, they're doing it in its fully most deadliest capabilities, and they keep their teams exceptionally small and very lean. And they make all the equipment in Israel at classified IMI facilities, and they do very good work. But in the United States, it's an unfortunate situation. I'll just leave it at that. Don't want to belabor the point, but to put it in technical phrase, the government TSCM schools suck bad. They suck really bad. These other countries, they have a much more improved system, but the U.S. government schools suck. All right, a little tribute to Sun Tzu here. If you know the enemy's spies' capabilities and you know your own equipment, in your 100 TSCM inspections, you will never miss a single bug. But when you are ignorant of the enemy's spies' capabilities, but know your own equipment, your chances of finding the bug are equal. However, if ignorant both of your enemy's spies' capabilities and ignorant of your own equipment, you are sure to never find the bug, and the enemy's spies will always succeed. And I wrote this, but with apologies to Sun Tzu. So thank you very much for joining me on this latest journey. We have a few more doing this series. I believe this is video 5 of 18 about the modern eavesdropping threat. It gets pretty hairy from here on out, so feel free to let me know what your thoughts are. Please like, subscribe, and then mention links to this video series all around other social media. And please come back, and I thank you very much for your time. And when you do come back, settle in and watch, because there are hundreds of free hours of video on this channel, and it's all about bug sweeps, and it's all about espionage and counter-espionage. You have a very blessed day.